How's it going? So we're gonna have a little chat about the moon landing. And yeah, so growing up, I never questioned it. I always believed we landed on the moon because why wouldn't I believe that? We were always told that, we were taught that. Of course we did, right? So I've heard the people talk, we never landed on the moon, there's no way. I thought, let me go see what people are talking about. So today, I'm going to tell you what people are talking about. I'm going to tell you what NASA says, what the theorists who don't believe we landed on the moon say, and you can kind of decide for yourself. So let's dive in. So on July 20th, 1969, humans left Earth, crossing nearly 400,000 kilometers of space, and walked on the moon. But did they really? In 19 doubt, so doubt started quickly. In 1976, Bill Kaysing, a former US Navy officer, self-published the book We Never Went to the Moon: America's $30 billion Swindle. In 1956, he was an employee of Rocketdyne, the company that built the F-1 engines used on the Saturn V rocket, and he served as head of technical publications in the company's propulsion field laboratory until 1963. His book claims that the chance of a successful landing on the moon was calculated as 0.0017%, and despite close monitoring by the USSR, it would have been easier for NASA to fake the moon landing than to really have gone there. So doubt started quickly that we didn't land on the moon. It's not something, that is new. People have been questioning it basically since it happened. So let's start with some of the issues that people have with sending a man to the moon, or, believing that it was possible in 1969 that we did have the technology to do these things. So the first thing we'll talk about is the Van Allen radiation belts. So these are belts that surround the Earth, and they're intense radiation, like belts of intense radiation that are trapped by our planet's magnetic field. So the high energy particles are capable of damaging electrons and damaging human tissues. We all know what radiation does, right? So, but the claim is that Apollo astronauts passed through these belts twice with 1960s technology and a 1960 spacecraft that they claim they can't replicate. Yeah, so NASA says the astronauts passed through the radiation belts quickly, so the exposure to radiation was not enough to cause harm. Apollo astronauts passed through the belts twice using 1960s technology, 1960 shielding, and 1960 spacecraft. Engineers still treat these belts with extreme caution, citing their difficulty as one of the reasons why it is so difficult for humans to travel into space. Yet it was possible in 1960 with no severe radiation consequences. And how could they have known that the radiation shielding on their ship would have been sufficient to protect the astronauts inside? So NASA states that the radiation doses that were experienced by astronauts during the Apollo missions was equivalent to like getting a few chest x-rays. They planned the mission to pass through the thinnest parts of the belt quickly. NASA states that these belts are not a wall of death that make human space travel impossible. And okay, so maybe the astronauts passed through the radiation belts with little to no effect. It's similar to getting a couple of chest x-rays. But what about all the film they brought back from the moon? We know that radiation damages film. So the amount of radiation that occurs inside a CT scanner is enough to damage film, causing fogging, increased grain, and band-like distortions. So NASA says the spacecraft traveled through the belts quickly, which minimized cumulative radiation doses. Film magazines were often made of metal, often aluminum, which served as a barrier against charged particles. They used special low sensitivity film, which was more resistant to radiation fogging. And all of this, in addition to this spacecraft structure shielded that film against any radiation damage that would have occurred when passing back through the belts. But Apollo didn't just capture footage, it transmitted it from the moon across deep space with analog systems, limited bandwidth, immense distance, and cosmic radiation. Apparently, Apollo transmitted live television from the moon in a time where you were lucky enough to make a phone call across the state. But in 1969, in deep space, they were able to broadcast images from the moon without a time lapse. The signal arrived stable, usable, and consistent. And many question, well, who filmed Neil Armstrong landing on the moon? NASA says that cameras on the lunar module did. The Apollo TV camera mounted in the modularized equipment storage assembly of the Apollo lunar module gave a view of the exterior. While still on the lunar steps, Armstrong deployed the camera from the side of the lunar module, unpacking the camera, whatever. The camera was powered on a signal transmitted back to Earth, and this meant upwards of 600 million people on Earth could watch the live feed with only a very slight delay. Similar technology was also used on subsequent Apollo missions. It was also filmed on an automatic 16mm movie camera mounted in the window of the lunar module. But how could there be no delays in communication? There had to be at least a 2-second delay between Earth and the moon at a distance of 250,000 miles or 400,000 kilometers. And the original telemetry tapes recorded over. Yes, 45 tapes apparently recorded over, not one, 45. Now let's talk about the photos. People often cite photographic and film oddities in the photos and films taken from the moon landing. So one of the things that people cited as an issue with the photographs from the moon landing was that, so on the cameras, there's tiny black crosshairs etched onto the camera's glass plate, which is designed for measurement and precision geometry when filming. It's called a Rassot plate. So that crosshair is on the camera. So like your lens is here, that crosshair is on the camera. So it wouldn't be able to move. It wouldn't be able to be behind images because it's on the camera. Yet, in some images, these crosshairs appear partially obscured, missing, or interrupted by bright objects. If the crosshairs are etched onto the plate of the camera, it should be impossible for an object to appear in front of the crosshair grid. The explanation from NASA is that the effect of the crosshairs appearing behind images or not being visible only occurs on the copied and scanned photographs. They stated that the crosshairs are only about 0.004 inches thick, and it was easy for the images to bleed out or become obscured. NASA provided enlargements of poor quality photos in 2004, where previously bled out crosshairs were now fully visible when in 1998 scans the crosshairs appear to be missing. NASA stated that any images where crosshairs appeared to be rotated in the wrong place or missing was due to cropping or rotating of photos for aesthetic impact. Another image that's frequently brought up is an image of an astronaut who is standing in a full shadow of the lunar module, but he's lit up where you can see his suit is fully white. There also appear to be shadows casting in different angles in the moon landing images, which lead people to believe in artificial lighting or studio lighting, as the shadows should have all faced the same direction, theoretically, if they had one source lighting, the sun. But we'll dive into that a little more. There's a Mythbusters episode that we'll go through that kind of goes through some of these theories and tries to bust them, however you think. Another thing that people often claim is that the photos have identical backgrounds. So apparently the photos, they're taken miles apart, but their backgrounds appear to be identical. So NASA says the backgrounds are not the same. They're just very similar. And what appear as nearby hills in some photos are actually mountains, but because there's no depth, or there's no aerial perspective on the moon, they can't distinguish between the objects. So the the hills and the mountains look the same, but it's just because there's no aerial perception on the moon.
Huh?
Another claim made is that the qualities of photos from the 1960s are implausibly high, and NASA's response is that many poor quality photos were taken by NASA astronauts as well, but they only chose to publish the best ones. So the argument is that it's 1960, how'd your cameras take such great photographs up on the moon? Your camera shouldn't have been good enough, kind of thing. And their explanation is, well, we took bad photos too. Issue a lot of theorists bring up is, if there is zero gravity on the moon, why does the American flag appear to be flapping in the breeze? NASA says the astronauts twisted the pole while planting it in, and because there's no air resistance on the moon, the fabric kept moving longer than it would have on Earth, so it looks like it's rippling in the wind. The flag that they use for the moon had a bar across the top to hold the flag up, so the flag's like metal here and metal here, so it would like stay up straight. So they're saying when they twisted it, that motion is what kept the you know what? I'll just stop right here because they go through that in the Mythbusters episode too. Another thing people state is that in the images of the moon, there are no stars. And the statement from NASA is that the surface of the moon is so brightly lit because they landed on the moon at lunar sunrise. And so it would be like taking a photo on Earth in the day. We can't see stars in the day. Many theories contend that NASA chose not to put the stars into photos because astronomers would have been able to use them to determine whether the photos were taken from Earth or the moon by identifying and comparing celestial positions. NASA states that although stars were visible from the moon's surface, the optical equipment used was not able to capture the stars. The dim light of the stars during the lunar daytime did not provide enough exposure to record visible images. The stars were outshone by the sun, and the sunlight reflected off the moon's surface. Apparently, astronauts could only see stars with the naked eye when they were in the shadow of the sun. But the astronauts from the Apollo mission state they never seen stars from the surface of the moon. Even the astronaut orbiting the moon does not recall seeing any stars. The explanation for the stars not being visible makes perfect sense. Where it starts to fall off is when the astronaut orbiting the Earth claimed he doesn't recall seeing any stars. And the reports from the Apollo astronauts directly contradict NASA's statement that they would have been able to see the stars from the camera, they just couldn't capture them. Maybe the experience was just so overwhelming for the Apollo astronauts that the details become hard to remember. But I feel like the view of stars from space would be pretty breathtaking and hard to forget. I did ask ChatGPT. I just wanted to see what would happen. I asked ChatGPT what its explanation for the man orbiting the moon not being able to see the stars was, and it timed out on me the first time. And then the second time, when I reprompted it, it said the explanation of lunar daylight, but if he was orbiting the moon, he would have been on the dark side too, because orbit is an elliptical revolution, like the Earth's orbit around the sun. And NASA claims that during the Apollo 11 mission, Michael Collins orbited the moon 12 times. I mean, landing at lunar sunrise also meant that the temperatures on the moon would not have been hot enough to damage the films and cameras because it was just the start of the lunar day. People claim that the Apollo mission took an implausibly high number of photos, up to 1 photo per 50 seconds, and they ask, how is this possible? NASA states that they had simplified gear with fixed settings that allowed 2 photos per second, and there were 2 astronauts sharing the workload. Simplified gear with fixed settings, but they were able to capture so many high-quality images? During the 2003 World Tour of Artificial Intelligence in Moscow, Russia, it was announced that AI had been used to detect some of the photos from the Apollo moon landing were indeed fake. This is extreme. Imagine this. This is received extremely limited coverage in America and has been ejected false by PolitiFact. Another common issue people have is there is no crater left behind by the lunar module. NASA states this is because Apollo 11 slowed down during its landing, so it softly impacted the moon, leaving no crater. But they also claim that they experimented crash landing into the moon with Apollo 12 and 13, claiming the moon rung like a bell. So where are those craters? The problem is the story doesn't add up, and it's not a great explanation. So there's another famous image of a rock which appears to have a C on it. It looks like a C, okay? So it's got a C-shaped object on it. Could this be a labeled studio prop? Film directors often have props labeled in this manner to ensure proper placement when setting up film sets. NASA claims that it is a printing imperfection and does not appear on the original film. It has been suggested that the C is a coiled hair. There is the Coca-Cola bottle conspiracy. A woman named Una Rowland from Perth, Australia said she saw a Coke bottle roll across the lower quadrant of her television screen that was displaying the live broadcast of the Apollo 11. She states she spoke to the news 10 days after the incident, but no such newspaper or recordings have ever been found. Well, they wouldn't be. Many people claim that if the moon landing was fake, it would have to be one of the largest cover-ups in human history, sustained for 50 years. So what? The government be lying all the time. In May of 2023, Dmitry Rogozin, I probably butchered that, former Director General of the Russian Space Agency, expressed doubt that U.S. astronauts landed on the moon. He complained of not receiving a satisfactory answer when he asked his agency to provide evidence. His colleagues at Roscosmos were angry about his questions and did not want to undermine cooperation with NASA. Shut the fuck up, you're gonna get us in trouble. So, what about the space race between the US and the Soviet Union? The USSR was ahead of the US in regard to the space race and space technology, and yet, in the end, the USSR was never able to fully fly a crewed spacecraft to the moon, let alone land one on the surface. During the Apollo program, the USSR had 5 times more crewed hours in space than the United States, and notes that the USSR was the first to achieve many of the early milestones in space. The first official satellite in orbit, October 1957, Sputnik 1. The first living creature in orbit, a dog named Laika, November 1957, Sputnik 2. The first man in space and in orbit, Yuri Gagarin, April 1961, Vostok 1. The first woman in space, Valentina Tereshkova, June 1963, Vostok 6, and the first spacewalk by Alexei Leonov in March 1965 on the Voskhod 2. And then there are a number of suspicious or just deaths involved around the moon landing with people related to the moon landing. So Theodore Friedman, NASA astronaut, was killed ejected from a T-38 during a bird strike. Elliot See and Charles Bassett died in a T-38 crash. Virgil Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger B. Chaffee died in an Apollo 1 test fire in January 1967. Edward Ed Givens killed in a car accident in 1967. Clifton C.C. Williams killed ejected from a T-38, October 1967. Michael J. Mike Adams died in an X-15 crash, November 1967. Robert Henry Lawrence Jr. killed in an F-104 crash in December 1967. And Thomas Ronald Barron, who died in an automobile crash on April 27, 1967. Between 1966 and 1967, 13 people involved in Apollo 11 space mission died in various accidents, including the Apollo 1 test fire that occurred 2 years before Apollo 11, killing 3 astronauts that had expressed concern about the construction of the command module prior to the fire. Yet, we are to believe that people wouldn't have an incentive to keep their mouths shut. The number of deaths within the American Astronaut Corps during the run-up to the Apollo missions is similar to the number of deaths incurred by the Soviets at the same time. During the period of 1961 to 1972, at least 8 Soviet cosmonauts died in various accidents or suicide. NASA states that the deaths were normal from this time period, many of the astronauts also being pilots flying high-risk missions. So, did the moon landing happen in a studio? Many people believe it did. In 1968, a year before the moon landing, Stanley Kubrick released 2001: A Space Odyssey. Kubrick used moon lenses to film, and most striking was the scene set on the moon, in which a group of astronauts, post-human in their suits, descend into an excavation where once again the human race comes into contact with a monolith. Though shot in a studio, it looks more real than the actual landings. It's the shadow and light, the space and enclosure, and the way people move. Also, no CGI, no computer-created effects, everything is actual models. There really was a space station, and it really did turn. There really was a lunar surface covered with rocks. It gave everything the weight you don't feel in newer movies. To conspiracy theorists, it made perfect sense that NASA, realizing it could not actually land on the moon, turned to Kubrick. Many theories believe The Shining contains hints to the fact that he helped fake the moon landing. I am a huge fan of Stephen King, and The Shining is one of my favorite movies, and I just always was like, directors do that, but it's funny what the theories come up with. So the sweater. Danny, the main character's son, is wearing a sweater featuring a knitted Apollo 11 rocket, a nod to the faked mission. Room 237 in the book The Shining, the room is 217. I always wondered why it was 237 in the movie. Apparently it's because that's the average distance to the moon. The carpet pattern. The geometric carpet pattern is claimed to resemble the launch pad for the Apollo 11 mission. All work and no play, interpreted by some as a hidden reference to Apollo. The phrase all work and no play make Jack a dull boy, typed repeatedly, does not appear in Stephen King's original 1977 book. And if you look at the typewriter when he's typing on screen, all looks like it's written like A11. I'll throw a picture up here so you can see. But it looks like A11, and the all is the only part of the sentence that is capitalized. So, I mean, it's a little bit weird, right? These details are intriguing to film buffs, but dismissed as coincidences or artistic choices. Kubrick's daughter, Vivian, has publicly called the theory a grotesque lie. Kubrick died on March 7th, 1999 at 70 years old in his home of a heart attack just days after finishing filming for Eyes Wide Shut, which is believed to be an expose of the elite occult and criminal networks, specifically child trafficking and pedophile rings operated by the powerful. Many believe that this is Kubrick's way of revealing the secrets he learned about Hollywood and the elites. With everything going on lately, could Kubrick have just known too much? Too much about the moon? Too much about the secret societies? There are allegations that after Kubrick's death, 20 to 45 minutes of footage was cut, which allegedly contained more damning evidence of these secret societies. Official records point to a natural death, and many of the hidden secrets mentioned in his final film are said to be directly adapted from the 1962 source material, Dream Story. Although Kubrick did choose one of his film locations for Eyes Wide Shut at Mentmore Towers, an abandoned Rothschild mansion. Seems intentional. Okay, now let's go through the Mythbusters episode. The full episode is available on YouTube. If you want to go watch it, you can see for yourself. So, first thing I would like to say about it, they love NASA. So, like, when you do research, probably shouldn't be biased. It's hard to take a biased opinion when you're doing research, because you're going to say, oh, I'm going to go and prove these theories wrong, but I 100% believe this theory. So you're going into this experiment already deciding that these theories are wrong and NASA's right. So it's really hard for anyone to listen because it's biased. It just is. It's just how that works. It's called confirmation bias. So Mythbusters claim to debunk some of the major theories, but they go to NASA to do so. Which, like, obviously I get. Where else are they going to be able to recreate space conditions? So the Mythbusters video is like 5 minutes in, immediately addresses the fact that they are able to recreate the images. So the first thing they do is they set up a model moon base and spaceship with reflective dust to the same percentage that the moon's reflectivity is to, and they take some photos to debunk theories. So they show one photo people often refer to where the shadows are pointing different directions, and they recreate the image with one light source and the reflective dust to show that this would occur with one light source on the moon because of the way the reflective dust is. And yeah, so they recreate that. But if you look at the arrows, there is slight variation in the way the light moves. So again, but they are recreating it was on the moon. I'll throw the image up here. You can take a peek at it for yourself for a minute there. But yeah, so they recreate that and they debunk that. They only do one image, that one singular image. They don't go through any of the other shadow anomaly images people often refer to. Is it because that was the only one they could recreate?
Perfect.
They then go through the photo, as I referred to earlier, with the astronaut standing in the full shadow of the lunar module, but his spacesuit appears to be lit up white. So they recreate this again using their single light source to recreate the light of the sun. They black out the entire room. They use the reflective dust. They take the two images. They say the two images are identical. I've got them here for you clipped from the Mythbusters video. To me, they aren't identical. But again, they're recreating, these were on the moon, these were supposed to be with their model, but I see a lot more variation in light and shadow in this other image than I do in the other one. Not to mention that the shadow appears much darker in the image from NASA, and still the suit appears lighter, where in the image from Mythbusters, the shadow doesn't appear to be as black, but the suit still has more shadowing on it. Maybe I'm just a stickler for detail, but to me, I don't see identical photos. They say they're identical and they busted the theory. So they then test the theory that Neil's footprint wouldn't have been able to leave an imprint on the moon. And the reason stated for this is that when you step on the ground, the reason that a footprint is left is due to moisture. Like if you think when you're walking down the beach or you walk through mud, you leave that clear image. And because there's no water on the moon, he would not have been able to leave a footprint. So what they do is they take some dry sand, they take some wet sand on Earth, regular conditions, gravity, and they do the two impressions. The wet sand, you can clearly see that boot imprint. The dry sand, as you imagine, you can barely see anything. So they go to NASA to use NASA's vacuum to recreate the same experiment. And when they recreate it in the vacuum, the boot print is there. And they say this is because of the way moon rock is, that it compacts together and can hold that shape. But the one man says, the theory is busted. Now NASA will let us out of here. And then they test the big one, the flag on the moon. So NASA says the flag appears to be moving because the astronauts twisted the pole into the ground, which you can see on the video. You know, if you watch the videos of the moon landing, you can see them kind of maneuvering the flag into the ground like they were twisting it to get it to go in. The flag, but so they recreate the flag test inside a vacuum to see if how long the flag would move, if it would move, whatever. So they recreate the flag test inside the vacuum. Yes, the flag moves when it's manipulated and it continues to ripple for a little bit. They get really excited. They get really over enthusiastic and start like cheering kind of over what's going on. It's very distracting from watching the actual flag. They're like, oh, look, it moves. With theory busted. Big celebration. The flag doesn't move for very long, and it does not move in the same, my opinion. Again, it's on YouTube. You can go watch it. My opinion. The flag does not move in the same manner. It's not enough for me to see that much enthusiasm and that much, yes, we did it, we busted it, we proved it wrong. Like I said, it's so biased. There's no, okay, that wasn't exactly the same, but maybe there's no other possible theories discussed. It's just very one-sided. We landed on the moon. You guys are all idiots. Is very much how the episode goes. So then they say, unless there is a clear image of the flag, the NASA flag, where the flag still appears to be moving without the astronauts manipulating it, then we busted the myth. So I'll just throw up this image here for a hot little second. They then do the walk test on the moon. Everyone says, you know, they were on cables and they jumped on the cables and that's how they got it to look like they're walking on the moon. They tested on cables. They tested in the anti-gravity chamber. They then exclaim, they look nothing alike. They look exactly the friggin' same to me. And I'm a stickler for detail. I really can't see the nuances in between the two movements, especially nobody knows what it's like to walk on the moon. So anyways, they're saying it's not the same. It looks the same to me. None of this proof is enough for me, especially because it comes from such a biased source. I need someone to go into this being like, okay, I'm not convinced. Convince me one way or the other. They then start talking about the retroreflectors and how this is clear evidence that we landed on the moon. They test if they can bounce a laser off the retroreflector on the moon, proving they're there. You know, astronauts still use these retroreflectors today. It proves we landed on the moon. But retroreflectors were also placed by Soviet rovers as well as astronauts landing on the moon. So astronauts didn't have to land on the moon for there to be retroreflectors. They were placed there by the Soviets prior to them landing. So that is not great evidence again. Oh, and we can't forget about all the moon rocks they brought back. Moon rocks analyzed by scientists worldwide to confirm their origin. But what are they comparing them to? Could they be from meteors that struck Earth? NASA and scientists state these rocks show signs of cosmic ray exposure and no water, proving they came from the moon. Moon rocks are similar to terrestrial basalts, lava rocks, found on Earth. They state that the rocks have no water composition, they're higher in iron and titanium, and the age of the rocks on the moon are much older than the rocks on Earth. Notably, one specific Apollo 14 sample, Big Bertha, was found to actually be a rock from Earth, which is ejected by a meteorite 4 billion years ago and landed on the moon, and then they found it. They state they were able to identify the rocks without a control sample, i.e. a rock they know for sure came from the moon, because the scientists rely on the characteristics of the lunar surface as cataloged by the previous Apollo missions. This is bad science. It's just bad science. I understand, you know, there's nowhere else to get the science from because who else has been to the moon? But it's bad science. So they're using NASA's information to confirm that the rocks came from the moon, that NASA said they came from. So the Apollo missions brought back 842 pounds of rocks over the 6 missions to the moon. They state they had to trade off weight and leave behind equipment, such as tools, cameras, personal items, in order to have enough fuel to bring the rock back, displace the weight. But there are no photos left behind on the moon of all the equipment they left behind. I looked it up. So I found some images of photographs, coins, a little bit of equipment, kind of those kind of things. I don't see 842 pounds of equipment and tools left on the moon that would have allowed them to trade off for such a large amount and volume of moon rocks. Could be wrong. Just saying. Just calling it like I see it. That's it. On October 9th, 1969, during the Apollo 11 tour, the Giant Leap Goodwill Tour, to different countries around the world, former Dutch Prime Minister Dres received a moon rock from U.S. Ambassador J. William Middendorf as a gift. It later turns out that this moon rock was only a piece of petrified wood. What? So, more evidence come from NASA is that photographic evidence shows images from the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter clearly show the Apollo landing sites, scientific equipment, and even the tracks of the astronauts. They say that independent tracking by multiple countries, including rivals and nations who were hostile to the US, never disputed the missions, except in 2003. It is possible that this is because the truth would damage those nations, not just the US. Because if we don't think enemies are going to hold hands over something mutual, they will keep their mouths shut. Yeah. If there's a bigger plot, they will keep their mouths shut. I guarantee it. So they state that over 400,000 people worked on the Apollo program, and the massive amount of data and technology developed is well documented. I thought they lost the documents and the blueprints and the videos. Now, when they say 400,000 people worked on the Apollo program and it would have to be a massive cover-up, so if you work in a factory, the guy making the part for the car in the factory doesn't know that the people who work for the head office are cheaping out on the parts and people are dying. That person doesn't know those things. That person just makes the part. So yeah, there might have been 400,000 people involved with the Apollo program, but that means maybe 100 of them knew what was really going on. So yeah, they worked on the program. They made parts for the ship. They did these things. They built a ship. They put a ship in the sky. The question is, were there astronauts inside of that ship, and did they really land onto the moon and walk on it? So, because people will say, well, what about all the people in Houston who've seen the rocket take off? Well, they launched a rocket into the sky. They built a rocket. They wanted to pretend this really happened, but whether or not they were able to actually get onto the moon after that rocket left Earth is the question. And that's the question a lot of people have, because they don't have great explanations. After going through I'm sorry, they don't have great explanations for things. They have a lot of really just not great explanations, and people don't like that. Give me a good answer and show me the proof. The most compelling evidence cited by individuals for the moon landing is that you can look at the moon and see objects with a telescope, but this doesn't prove man walked on the moon. Those items could have been left behind by rovers, unmanned missions. So did man walk on the moon or in a studio? It's been over 53 years and we haven't gone back. How has no other country been able to put a man on the moon? NASA claims they didn't lose the knowledge. The infrastructure is just no longer available. The factories shut down, tooling shut down, and production of those parts was halted. How is it possible we carry supercomputers in our pockets, land reusable rockets, and map distant planets, yet returning to the moon has taken over half a century with no real plans or way to return? Was the technology really lost, or did it never exist? NASA says there's no reason to go back. Cost is cited as one of the biggest obstacles for man to return to the moon. They say that the Apollo program cost $3 billion in today's money, and modern NASA budgets are half of that. Elon Musk could pay for that and still have over half his money, as if that freak wouldn't be flying people to the moon if it wasn't possible. The Apollo mission was a race against the Soviet Union, and once it was won, there was no political motivation to fund such high-risk, expensive missions. Remember, Russia was ahead of US in the space race, but still somehow was never able to put a man on the moon. NASA states that the moon's environment is hazardous, with extreme temperatures and sharp lunar dust that plague the Apollo equipment. As if sending people in a tin can down to see the Titanic wasn't dangerous. NASA has shifted their focus to the International Space Station and Shuttle program and robotic exploration, which is seen as more sustainable, cost-effective, and scientifically productive in the long term. People often cite an incident in 2002 where Buzz Aldrin punches a reporter in the face who confronts him and asks him to swear on the Bible that he walked on the moon. The reporter calls him a coward, a liar, and a thief, and then Buzz hits him in the face. I would like to note that the reporter, Bart Sibrel, is a prominent moon landing conspiracist who believes the moon landing was faked and filmed in a studio. He's written many books about it and has dedicated his life to revealing that the moon landing was fake. So the man's been harassing the Apollo astronauts for years, and maybe Buzz was just tired of it. Maybe many people cite this as proof that Buzz is lying, but I think he might have just been fed up. If it's true and this man kept harassing me, I might clock him too. Bart Sibrel also claims he was abducted by the CIA, where they tried to stop him revealing things about the moon landing. He is still alive, though. Some people believe that we did indeed land on the moon, but that the footage was faked. But if we really went to the moon, then why would we have to fake the footage? So, did we land on the moon? Is it man's greatest leap or man's greatest lie? Are the inconsistencies just strange coincidences or something deeper or more nefarious? What do you think? Because, why would the government ever lie to us, right?